What's up, y'all, and welcome into the Jack Vita Show. I'm your host, as always, Jack Vita, taping this on a Friday right before Christmas. This is my Christmas gift to all of you listeners, to those who celebrate and those who are celebrating a happy Festivus tomorrow, and happy Hanukkah to all of our Jewish friends. Happy holiday season, happy New Year. So, we are taping this. We had some big baseball news drop late last night. The Los Angeles Dodgers continue. The rich get richer. We'll talk about that. We've got other hot stove news to get to, and we might have some time later. We'll talk a little bit about the MLB Hall of Fame voting. Joining us to break it all down, we have the perfect guest to do it. Longtime baseball writer, currently a national baseball writer and senior editor at Sportico. He's as you can see, Hall of Fame voter since 1992?
Yeah, 1992.
1992.
Yeah, Tom
Uh,
Seaver was my first one.
oh, awesome. And then I've had the joy to get to know him. Just an awesome guy, mentor of mine, Mr. Barry Bloom. I call him Barry Legend. Welcome, Barry.
Oh, thanks very much. It's too kind of you, Jack.
It's great to have you here. So let's lead off with this. I mean, I wasn't expecting that we'd have this news right in our inbox this morning when we were planning this a couple days ago. But your quick takeaway on the Dodgers agreeing to a 12-year, $325 million contract with Yoshinobu Yamamoto.
Well, I mean, I think obviously they needed pitching. They signed Ohtani, and he's not going to pitch this season because he's recovering from elbow surgery again. So, their rotation is pretty spare. That they would go out and spend another 300 million on the top pitcher on the market is fairly amazing. But if any team can do it, it's them because they've got money to spare. I mean, this is an organization. It's Guggenheim. It's a hedge fund that handles about $500 billion. There's plenty of money to go around, and they're not hesitating to spend it. The question for me now is, with all these signings, they were a 100-win team last year. They were a 107-win team the year before. They didn't get by the Padres or the Diamondbacks in the NLDS. Does this put them one step further? Does this get them to the World Series? And to win the World Series in a season where there's 162 games, which they haven't done since 1988?
It's a great question. I've had the same question too. I mean, a lot of people, and that was what I was going to ask you next, is a lot of people are already crowning them the champs. I think a lot of the, maybe just baseball fans in general, they don't like, they see another team spending a lot of money. Maybe they want their team to spend the same amount of money. But, I mean, it was less than 12 months ago. I guess it was a year ago. Weren't we having the same conversation with the New York Mets when they agreed to that huge contract with Correa, but then they ended up not going through with it? But they had that gigantic payroll. People were ready to crown the Mets a year ago.
Well, and the Padres, for that matter, too, with all the money they've spent over the last couple of seasons. I mean, look, winning the offseason does not necessarily translate into, success during the regular season or making the postseason or winning the postseason. I mean, if you look at the salary structure in baseball last year, the top three teams, the Yankees, the Mets, and the Padres, none of them made the playoffs. So it's not just how much money you spend, it's how judiciously you spend it and how the teams mesh when you bring all these high priced players and money players together. And it creates striations in the clubhouse. I noted that the Yankees went as high as $300 million on Yamamoto, but they weren't going to go to 324, which is what they paid Cole, because they knew that would be a problem in their clubhouse. And Cole would be right back to them looking for more money. And this is what happened. I mean, For a while, Mookie Betts was like the highest paid player in baseball in the Dodger clubhouse. And then you add Freddie Freeman, who's making good money. And now you've added $1 billion on Ohtani and Yamamoto, not to mention the $50.7 million that the RX Buffaloes are going to be paid in a posting fee on top of the $325 million contract. So this is in excess of $1 billion that the Dodgers have spent for one guy who is going to hit, and he's going to be the most expensive DH in history in Ohtani, and another guy who's, if you're healthy and you're lucky, is going to pitch 30 times. And coming out of Japan, where they pitch in a 6-person rotation, it depends on what the load is going to be on his arm, on how many times a week you're going to be able to pitch him. So if you're pitching him like basically one day a week, and you're getting 25 to 30 starts out of him, that's an awful lot of money for just somebody competing in 30 games. So people can do whatever they want, but it's the usual. You could say a team is going to win, and it really doesn't matter until you throw the first ball out on the field.
Yeah, and it's an awful lot of money to spend to someone who's never thrown a pitch in Major League Baseball before. I mean, how is he going to get acclimated coming over from Japan? I know we've seen several players from Japan. Here in Chicago, good example, Kosuke Fukudome. That guy was a superstar in Japan. He comes over here, and I think he struggled with moving and coming over to the Midwest. And for whatever reason, it just didn't really work the way it would. 10-year contract for that kind of money. I think people would call me a cheap GM or a cheap owner if I were running teams. That's not really how I would spend my money, especially on a guy who has not pitched in the big leagues before. Obviously, there's a very high ceiling here, but you mentioned if one of these guys gets injured, that's a huge, huge hit to your payroll. If that guy cannot perform the way that you're expecting him to.
Well, I think what you have to look at as far as Japanese players go is that generally the pitchers come over here and they acclimate a lot better than the hitters do. You know, hitting by and large, except for the Tanakas and Nomos and Yakamoto and Ohtani when he was pitching over there, they're basically facing double-A pitching over there. That's what the general tenor of the league is. And now you play with a different ball. You come over here and you have to adjust to major league pitching that you've never faced before. And it's a big leap. So if you look at the position players, the guys who've come over and been a big success are pretty limited. The Ichiro, obviously, Hideki Matsui with the Yankees, and he won the World Series for them and was hit 600 in the World Series and won the MVP of the 2009 World Series. The Red Sox made a good pickup last year, and so, but the long term, I think your chance of the pitching helping is a lot greater. There's a long history of good Japanese pitchers, excelling in the major leagues. The only problem really is that Japanese pitchers, and I guess you got Yamamoto at 25. He's thrown 200 pitches since high school every game. So there's a lot of wear and tear on these arms. Tanaka came over here with an elbow injury. Certainly, Ohtani came over here with a grade 1 tear in his ulnar nerve or ulnar ligament in that right elbow, and before he turned it around, it was a grade 2, and he wound up having Tommy John surgery. So you just don't know how these guys are going to adjust. On the other hand, if you worked for the Dodgers, there'd be no sense for you to be a cheap general manager because they have the money, and even if there are sunken costs that they have to bear because some of their free agent signings don't excel, they've got plenty of money to do it. It's a drop in the bucket.
Well, and they expect these Japanese stars to bring in a lot of revenue too, especially with the Japanese markets.
Well, unfortunately, The Dodgers are just not one of the teams that needs that kind of money. They're
Right.
maxed out in every area that they possibly could be. I mean, both of those guys, either Ohtani or Yamamoto, really would have helped the San Francisco Giants, who are averaging about 28,000 people there at Oracle Park right now. So ticket sales, television, merchandising, marketing, that all would have been made a big difference for the Giants. It would have made a big difference for the Diamondbacks. But the players have the choice of where they want to sign. And so they do. And they wind up going to this market. Look, the Dodgers have a 50,000 seat ballpark that they fill every day. They have the highest attendance in the league every year. Their television money, they're one of the few teams left. They had an $8.5 billion television contract that they've monetized. There's no shortage of money there. Neither of these guys are going to help them in that end. All they're going to help them do is where in the equation do they fit that's going to give them the 11 extra wins that they're going to need to win the World Series.
Yeah, and I think the Glasnow trade was interesting. I know Rhett and I talked about it a few days ago. Is Glasnow's a great pitcher when he's healthy. One of the problems the Dodgers have had is their pitchers have not been healthy when they get into the postseason. So I think that's a huge key is can they have a healthy pitching staff going in the postseason? I mean, you had a front row seat watching them there when you were. I mean, I know you cover a lot of Diamondback stuff out there in Arizona. What'd you see in that series? What do you think they need in addition to pitching, or do they need anything else?
The Dodgers at this point?
Yeah,
Well, I mean, the fact is that 2 years in a row, the the Padres and the Diamondbacks were able to shut down Mookie and Freeman at the top of the lineup in both of those series. Neither of those guys ever got going offensively, and it hurt the whole Dodger lineup from top to bottom. And so, what I think Ohtani does is now he gives them a number three hitter in the lineup behind those two guys. And if they're not hitting, or it takes a time for them to straighten out, they've got him there, they've got Muncy there, they've got Smith. They've now got a pretty formidable lineup with Ohtani in that lineup. So I think that's going to make a big difference. The pitching, Kershaw last year was on his last legs, as we saw in the opening inning of that series against the Diamondbacks, where he let up 6 runs. And, maybe a catch in the outfield by Outman, and Peralta might have saved him in that inning, saved the Dodgers. Balls that should have been caught were not caught. But to be that as it may, they knocked Kershaw out, and then he went to shoulder surgery, and who knows when and if he's ever going to pitch again. And that set the tone for the entire series. And now you're like game 3 with Lance Lynn, trying to ward off elimination. So between their offense and their pitching last year, it's amazing that they got to 100 wins last year, considering the circumstances they were in injury-wise all year. I mean, their whole pitching staff was knocked out. So we'll see if Buehler comes back from Tommy John. Now you have Yamamoto. They're going to have to toy around a little bit with the rest of the rotation, but it stretches out the rotation. Like you said, if Glasnow is healthy, all of this is if they're healthy. It just, that's what it all comes down to. You really need like 9 starting pitchers to open the season now, because 3 or 4 of them are going to get hurt. You have to have that kind of depth, and the Dodgers are an organization that can do it. I think also in the equation here is that the Padres and the Diamondbacks really didn't get much worse either going into next season. The Diamondbacks have built on what they already did, and the Padres have lost a few people on the fringes, but they still have Tatis, Bogarts, Manny will come back from his surgery. Cronenworth, Kim. They've got some great players. Now the question is, they still have Darvish, Musgrove coming back from an injury. They still have a team that's going to be competitive, and maybe this year without the pressure that they're under to win, they'll be better this year. So there are teams in that division that the Dodgers are going to have to contend with, and certainly the Giants at this point look like they're nowhere.
Speaking of the Padres, I'll give you one here. So the Padres, I saw recently, are one of the teams that are in on Cody Bellinger. Now, the Padres don't look like they're going to be spending huge the way that they may have over the last couple of years. However, Bellinger, I'm starting to think with Bellinger, he wants reportedly 10 years, $250 million. I don't know if anyone's going to give him that. He could, if he wants to, sign a 1-year deal, try to put together another season like he did last year, and then hit the market again and go for that big contract then. Because I think teams would be much more willing to give him a 8 to 10 year contract if he puts together 2 years in a row like last year. But some might be concerned that he gets the big contract. Last year was an anomaly. His hard hit rate was down. Maybe he checks out a little bit. I mean, and so if he signs a 1-year deal, I could see San Diego being a good fit for him.
Well, I think that you kick that can down the road to February. If he doesn't get a long-term contract,
right.
then
Absolutely.
maybe a team like the Padres can pick him off for a year because he's going to be desperate to sign somewhere.
Exactly.
But until then, he's still going to be one of the highest profile free agents in the market.
Right.
And there are teams that could use him. To your point, though, I don't think the Padres are spending 10 years, $250 million on anybody anymore. So, they had a mandate after their owner Peter Seidler died, and even before, to cut $60 million out of the payroll to match the television money that they lost when the Ballot contract went away mid-season last year. They were earning $60 million and probably more than that in the step nature of that contract as it went on. But I mean, they've already, they've lost Hader, they've lost Snell, Martinez is gone. I mean, they've lost a number of people, which already takes up that $60 million, and they're still going to have
Lugo.
They're still going to have a $200 million payroll. So I don't see the Padres being in the market for Bellinger, even in a 1-year deal. I mean,
Really?
I think that's a guy who, hey, if I were the Dodgers, I'd go back and get him too, because maybe you can get him for a 3-year contract and put him back in center field on this team, and that answers some of your outfield problems, because with Roberts already saying that Betts is moving to second base full time, they're going to need to fill out that outfield. So, I think that's more of a possibility than the Padres at this point.
Do you think Bellinger gets that 8 to 10 year contract?
No. I think that his injuries are, his up and downs over the last 3 or 4 years, are going to be predicated, in that kind of situation. And I don't think his value is that high compared to some of these other guys who have had injuries, like Ohtani for that matter. I don't think Ohtani's value is $700 million either. But the Dodgers were willing to pay, and a lot of other teams were willing to pay. So, but no, correct me. I think Bellinger is a Scott Burrows client.
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah. So that in itself is going to be a problem.
Yeah, I had heard that this is something that he could be holding out until spring training. And so that's where I could see, if no one's willing to give him that huge contract, and maybe they come down a little bit on that price. I mean, I think like a 6-year contract, teams would do that. He's age 28, so you pay him through age 34, but I don't see teams wanting to go 10 years. Maybe someone does. Maybe Toronto is so hungry to get somebody. That's what I know some people have talked about Toronto, but I think then if he's getting into spring training, it's like, okay, well, we need to get a deal done. So that's where the 1 year contract could come into play potentially.
Right. And it depends on who's controlling who. Is Bellinger controlling Scott, or is Scott controlling Bellinger? All of this is speculatory. Who knows?
Absolutely. Now, speaking of the Giants went out and we were talking a little bit about guys coming over from Japan. They picked up Jung-Hoo Lee from Korea, and they gave him a lot of money. It was 6 years, $120 million. Have you looked into Jung-Hoo Lee at all?
Yeah, I don't know much about him except for the fact that he missed a good part of the season last year with a broken leg, which is a typical move for the Giants. Like, I'm not really sure why signing a guy with a broken leg was okay, but not signing Korea with a chronic ankle injury from when he was early in his major league career was a big deal. And the medics told them not to do it. I mean, the Giants are incoherent to me. I think it was just, we lost out on Ohtani. We're not going to hire, they were being killed in the media in San Francisco. We're not going to go out and sign another big free agent, American free agent, because nobody wants to come here. And you have the Bryce Harper, Aaron Judge, Ohtani thing. And so I think they wanted to make a splash and do something, and that's what they did, because that was the most logical thing. That was what they had available.
So Jung-Hoo Lee, I was not very familiar with him. I did look at his stats, and you mentioned last year he only played 86 games. 318 batting average, 400 OBP, 860 OPS, only 6 home runs. Um, and I don't know. I think it's a lot of money to pay a guy again who is coming over from another country, has not played in Major League Baseball before, and I'm not seeing like the year before he had a much bigger year. He had 350, 23 home runs, but he doesn't have an absurd amount of power. He has hit after that year the most he had hit in a season was 15 home runs. He looks like he's primarily a contact hitter. Maybe he's a good leadoff hitter, but it seems like a lot of money and little bit of a risk.
Well, yeah, a lot of a risk, because you just don't know how, players from Korea are going to come over here and translate. And the same thing that we talked about with Japanese hitters coming over. Korea doesn't even have the high level pitching among a few guys that Japan does. So really, you are facing double A pitching over there, and you're going to a ballpark where you're probably not going to hit a lot of home runs anyway. So, we'll see. It seemed, like I said to you, it seemed like desperation mode for the Giants. Their ownership is putting them under a lot of pressure in baseball ops to get things done. I think, Farhan knows he's got one more year. And right now, they're a fourth place team in the division, unless there's some really catastrophic thing happens to the first three teams.
Do you think they go out and they try to add a Matt Chapman or another guy this winter?
Oh, I'm sure they're trying. Yeah. I mean, Matt Chapman would be a good fit for them, considering his Oakland ties, but they may not be willing to go out and pay the kind of money that Chapman wants. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting after the holidays, when you get into this January period between the beginning of January and then you know, into the beginning of February before the Super Bowl. And then you hit the Super Bowl, you hit spring training, and, a lot is going to happen in that 6 week period.
Yeah, Chapman has the ties to the Bay Area. He could play for Bob Melvin again, which I've heard he is a big Bob Melvin guy. That fit feels like it makes sense.
It does, but I think it's going to all come down to the money at this point.
Yep, absolutely. Now, the another team, obviously, in the NL West is the team that went to the World Series that you have gotten to see quite a bit over, recent years and especially last year. This amazing run that they had. The Diamondbacks have gone out and they've been pretty active this winter. I know they added Eugenio Suarez, they got Eduardo Rodriguez, they brought back Gurriel. It sounds like they're gonna try to add another guy, maybe Justin Turner or JD Martinez. How have you liked what they've done this winter?
Well, I mean, I've liked it that they've been proactive. I mean, I'm not sure that Eduardo Rodriguez is not $80 million down the tubes, just like it was on Bumgarner. I mean, here's a guy who's been hurt on and off, hurt on and off. You're in a situation here where, their top two pitchers, Zach Gallen and Merrill Kelly, they're underpaid now in comparison to what they've just paid this guy. That, as I said before, you don't like to say it, but it causes it causes problems in the clubhouse. You wonder if they paid Eduardo Rodriguez that kind of money, what are they going to have to pay to keep either of those two guys? And what are they prepared to do? Is this a one-off this year? They're just trying to parlay what they did last year, give themselves a fourth starter, which they didn't have, in the playoffs in the World Series. They got caught with bullpen games. They survived it against the Phillies. They didn't survive it against the Rangers. That game probably, what in the long run was the reason why they didn't win the World Series. So it looks like a quick fix to me, at this point. And so, they getting JD Martinez in as a DH might be a great add too. But I mean, really, when you look at the Diamondbacks, and I've said it a number of times. I mean, this is a team that won 84 games. I mean, I thought 87 would make the playoffs, but it wound up being 84 because the Cubs and the Padres were just coming on. The Cubs sunk. The Diamondbacks won 7 out of their last 8 against the Cubs and knocked them out. And basically, if they didn't win those 7 out of 8, they wouldn't have made the playoffs. But I mean, from August on, this was a team I went and saw get swept in LA, lose 3 out of 4 to the Mets at Citi Field, lose 2 out of 3 to the Yankees at Yankee Stadium, and then get beat by the White Sox and on their last road game of the season, and then get swept by the Astros and back into the playoffs on the last weekend of the season. And yet they still made the playoffs, and they, went to Milwaukee, knocked out the Brewers, caught the Dodgers at the right time and beat the Dodgers. Somehow, went to Philly and won the last 2 games of that series to knock off the Phillies. And then, ran into better managing and a better team, with the Rangers in the World Series. So whether they're going to be able to sustain this, even with what they got this year, is, anybody's guess. And plus, they were under the radar all year last year. They're not going to be under the radar this year. People are going to be gunning for them, and it's going to be a hard game every time they go out to play. And they're going to have to play well, and they're not going to be able to make mistakes. And, we'll just see as the season goes on how it forms. But I think one thing I'm certain of is the Dodgers have won the division title 10 out of 11 times. The year they didn't win, the Giants had 107 wins and they had 106. And then they went on and beat the Giants on the last pitch of the NLDS and went to the NLCS against the Braves. And by that time they were so beat up, they had so many injuries, they had nothing left to beat the Braves, and it still went 6 games. This is a very formidable team and a very good regular season team. So I think they're going to win the division again, and then it's a scramble below them on who gets a wild card, one of the 3 wild cards again. And the Diamondbacks are going to be toying around between 80 and 90 wins, and so are the Padres, and the Giants are not going to get to 80 wins. So I think there's your 2 contenders within that division for the playoff spots. And then you have to deal with, the Milwaukee's and the Mets and the Phillies and the teams that Washington came on last year. They're a much better team. The Marlins made the playoffs last year. There's a lot of teams in the NL that can win those wild card berths. So it's really up in the air at this point as far as anybody else beside the Dodgers winning the division, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, St. Louis could come back next year. Cincinnati's got a really nice young core. So I definitely think it'll be. I would like to see more wins getting into the playoffs. I think another big reason why 84 was enough to do it last year was because the Padres and the Mets took such a huge step back and really underperformed, as we mentioned at the top of the show.
Well, yeah, but also, the Cubs were right there, and they lost 7 out of 8 to the Padres to the Diamondbacks down the stretch. And the Padres were so far gone that they worked back to 82 and 80 and 2 games behind the wild card spot, but they had to dig themselves out of a huge hole just to get back there. And as you said, the Cardinals were just missing in action all year last year, and I'm not sure that they've retooled enough, to be that much better this year. It's all kind of a mystery, and I think not enough is made about the more balanced schedule, that you're not playing teams in your division 18 times or 19 times a year anymore. So essentially, you get a chance to knock off one of those teams that might be a wild card contender that are not in your own division, depending how the schedule is set. So yeah, it's a pretty balanced schedule, and there were a lot of reasons why the Diamondbacks were able to make it with 84 wins. Mostly because of, as you point out, the teams behind them didn't play any better and played worse than the Diamondbacks.
Yeah, you mentioned the competitive balanced schedule. Do you like it? Do you like the new schedule?
Yeah, I like the new schedule for the fact that you can see more teams. I mean, last year, usually from spring training on, I count up how many teams I've seen and how many teams I haven't. And I think I wound up seeing 28 out of the 30 teams last year. The only two I missed were the Tigers and the Twins, and they never came out west. It was just one of those years. They'll come out west this year. So we'll miss a couple of others. But we're going to open the season here this year, and the Yankees are going to be at Chase Field like the second week of the season, which will create a completely different dynamic. And it'll be interesting group of games early on. The one thing I do say about what the Diamondbacks have done in the offseason is that I think they finally in the second half of the season started to recapture the fan base in Phoenix, and especially September on and through the playoffs. They were really selling out the stadium and having great crowds that were very partisan to the Diamondbacks the last 2 months of the season through the playoffs and the World Series. I think what they did was they understand that where they're going to make their money is they've got a 48,000 seat ballpark. It's like, how many people can we fit into that ballpark every night? Because there's a lot of room there for them to make money on their attendance and their merchandising and their concessions and parking and whatever ancillary revenue there is locally, because what they're like the Padres in that they lost their $60 million TV contract too last year, and they've got to search around and find a way to spend to make the extra money. And I think what they did was, in the rare occasion, because they didn't do this during the pandemic, in the pandemic, they lost over $100 million, just like every other team. And instead of reinvesting in the team to get fans back, they basically sat on their hands because they couldn't afford it. And it created some very bad seasons and a lot of disinterest in the community. I think they understand this year that whether it's going to cost them more money and it's going to put them more in the hole in the red, I think with either renovations to that stadium or a new stadium coming, a new television deal that they're going to have to figure out, and keeping the interest in the community where it was at the end of last season. They had to reinvest in the team to make it a better team, or at least make the perception of it being a better team going into this season. And they certainly did that. And I applaud Ken Kendrick and their ownership group for spending that money. I mean, Kendrick always says that if they make money, they don't pocket it, they reinvest it in the team. And this is a real example of they made extra money last year, and what they did was they took it back and reinvested it in the team. And people in the community should be happy about that. They should support the Diamondbacks, and I hope that they continue to be interesting and competitive to keep that base really excited and coming out to the ballpark.
Hey, speaking of teams that have been active and aggressive this offseason, I want to give you some credit, Barry, because we had lunch a little over a month ago. It was probably a month ago now. And I asked you, what do you think the Yankees do from this point after last season? You said, I think they're going to make at least one big move. And I think you even predicted the Soto trade, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I thought, look, I've been talking, I know a lot of people in that organization. I've been talking to them about Soto for over a year. When the Padres at last trade deadline were dangling him out there, I said to them, why aren't you going after this guy? He's going to fill a lot of your needs in the outfield and in your lineup. And as a left-handed bat at the stadium, especially if you want to go for the playoffs, which at the trade deadline last year, they were still they weren't out of it. They were still fairly in contention for a wild card spot. And their answer was it was going to cost them too many prospects and they didn't want to do it, which was essentially Brian Cashman's mantra for the last number of years, until Hal Steinbrenner steps in and says, I don't care about your prospects. Get a team on the field that's going to win now. So you saw they traded 5 young players for 1 year of Soto. Their chances of signing Soto are probably tough because it's another Scott client. And Scott already turned down 15 years, $420 million or so from the Nationals when he was right before he was traded to the Padres. So, I mean, there's no doubt that unless the Yankees sink a big load of money into this guy to extend his contract, that he's going to go out into the market next season. So the Yankees have a 1 year rental on the guy, where if they had made the trade at the trade deadline last season, they would have had him for a year and a half and 2 pennant runs. And maybe they make the playoffs if they make that deal last season.
2.5 years, actually.
Yeah. So now it'd be 1 year this year and half the season last year. So if they had done that, then they get 2 rounds with them instead of 1. And now it's basically, you look at their lineup, it's the same thing as, you point out with the Dodgers and Ohtani. Now all of a sudden you have, Soto at the top of the lineup, and he was on base something like 330 times last year. And you have Judge hitting behind him, and suddenly you have, some guys on base for Judge to knock in, and Soto is not afraid to take a walk. So he will be on base a lot. And it stretches the Yankee lineup. If you lead off LeMahieu, Soto, Judge, then you get down, if Stanton's healthy. I think Grisham is a really nice player. He hasn't hit the way he should in the big leagues, but Petco is a tough park for a left-handed hitter. I think he will produce. I think he had 12 or 13 home runs last year. He's going to hit home runs at Yankee Stadium, even if he doesn't hit for average. Plus, he's a great center fielder. And with Soto, he's negligible in left field. But Grisham will cover a lot of ground. I mean, I know people are saying It's going to be, they talk about Judge in center, Soto in right, Verdugo in left. But I think their best starting lineup has Soto in left, Grisham in center, and Judge in right, because Grisham covers so much ground. And Yankee Stadium is a big center field. He'll cover a lot of ground there. He'll make up for what he doesn't do offensively with what he's going to do defensively. And then you have younger players around the infield. You have Rizzo coming back from his concussion. Boone said that during the winter meetings that he's fine now, and it's just a matter of him doing it and getting accustomed to coming back. So you've got a lineup that was right-handed dominant. Now suddenly you've got, Rizzo back, Soto and Grisham, and they're all left-handed at Yankee Stadium. This is going to be a big thing for them. Now you get into, do they get enough pitching? If I were them, I'd sign Josh Hader in a heartbeat because they need a closer. Clay Holmes was a ragtag from Pittsburgh, journeyman player with arm injuries when they picked him up. He had a good half season, made the All-Star team last year. It's not going to happen again. You need a closer. So if I were them, Hader's the next guy I spend money on, and then see what else is out there pitching wise that they can sign as you get deeper towards spring training. But I think they're going to be a very interesting team, and I really think they have a good chance to win 90 games to 100 again.
Yeah, I think they're going to be a lot better. And I think Verdugo, it'll be interesting to see how they use him. You mentioned that you think their best lineup is with Grisham in center field, and maybe that's the direction they go in. If that is what they roll out most of the time, how is Verdugo being used?
Then he's used off the bench, and he's used, when they cycle people and want to rest people. Soto is going to play every day. Judge is going to play every day. And then you have the question of, how long is Stanton going to stay healthy? And then what's he going to do when he's healthy? Usually when he's healthy, he produces, but he doesn't stay healthy. So there's plenty of room for Verdugo, to have an impact. And, I think to me, spot start him, bring him off the bench, he'll have an impact on the team. He's not a great player either, and I just don't think he's the defensive player that, Grisham is.
I think he's a nice player, but it'll be interesting to see how he handles that type of role. Because I know that there have been whispers about him maybe not being the greatest culture guy or having the greatest fit in some of the spots he's been. This is an opportunity for him to embrace a new role. We'll see if he's up for it.
Yeah, and it also gives him a chance to, to excel. And eventually he'll probably play because,
Yeah.
look, nobody expected Judge to miss 50 games last year, because of that toe injury banging into the wall in, Dodger Stadium. So, I mean, those are the things that you can't predict and are going to happen. So you're much better off having the depth than not. You don't want to go down to the minor leagues to grab somebody to play because one of your frontline people has been hurt. You've got a guy like Verdugo who's on the roster, with some experience who can help.
I have another rumor. There hasn't been, I don't think I've seen any reporting on it, but it's just hey, I could see this fit. And I'm curious to see if you see it or not. And it's the Jordan Montgomery returns to the Yankees situation.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. I think they got rid of Jordan Montgomery for a reason. His last month there was pretty terrible before they made the trade with the Cardinals. It didn't turn out to be a great trade for them because, Harrison Bader never really materialized. He played really well for them in the playoffs in 2021, 22, and 22, but otherwise he was hurt when he got there. He was hurt. He was always hurt. So, I mean, it wasn't a great deal, and Montgomery's been great for the Cardinals, great for the Rangers. But I think there's a perception that he's just one of those guys who's not going to contribute in New York. So I may be wrong on this, but I just don't see them spending the money. And I don't see Cashman admitting that,
Yeah.
we made a mistake with this guy, so we're going to bring him back.
Yeah, I've had the same thoughts in terms of it doesn't. I just can't really see them doing that. Do you think they add us another starting pitcher though?
Yeah, I think they're going to add another starting pitcher. They have to have a starting pitcher. You know, which one is out there that they're looking at this point? Yeah, I don't see them going after Snell, and I don't think Snell wants to play back there. I think Snell would rather stay on the West Coast if he can. Mariners, Angels. I heard Angels in the mix. We'll see. But yeah, I think they'll pick up another. I think starting pitcher and a reliever. And like I said, I'm very bullish on Hader.
Do you think they would trade for a starting pitcher? Would they give up more prospects for a Bieber or a Dylan Cease?
I don't think so, and I don't think they've got that many prospects anymore. I mean, I think they unloaded most of what they were willing to get rid of to the Padres in the Soto trade.
So, one more team I want to talk about, and I think we should talk some Hall of Fame stuff, is the Kansas City Royals have been one of the most active teams this offseason. They've gone out and they've made some sort of mid-level moves. They get Seth Lugo, they get Michael Wacha, both of whom are coming off very nice years in San Diego. They picked up Hunter Renfroe. They traded for Kyle Wright. Like, they've entirely recrafted their pitching rotation, which has been among the league worst over the past several years. Do you like what they're doing?
Yeah, and I think there's a perception there. Look, the two weakest divisions in baseball are the central divisions in both leagues. And the American League Central is certainly weak. Basically, you have the Twins. The Indians are middle of the road. The White Sox are awful. So I think there's a perception there that with a few moves that Kansas City could, make some move they could even win the league or win the division or compete for a wild card. So yeah, I don't blame them. Plus, you're also looking at they're talking about a new ballpark sometime in the next 5-6 years. There's some plans downtown. There's some plans in Missouri, right across. Right across the border, right near the border. They're going to build a new ballpark, and they're going to need to generate some interest there from people who are going to want to buy the club seats and the club seats and the executive suites that they're needed to sell to pay for that ballpark. So I think a lot of this is coming together, and that's why you're seeing the Royals doing what they're doing.
I think that rotation could be sneaky good next year. I like Cole Reagans a lot. Brady Singer pitched in the WBC. Kyle Wright, maybe he's due for a bounce back. And then, Wacha, Lugo, I think that's a pretty good rotation.
It's a pretty mediocre rotation. But again, you're playing in, a division where you could do some damage.
Yeah. It's not up with the league best. So I guess that's a good place to put them. But I do think it's significantly improved from what they've been rolling out the last few years.
Yeah, that's true. It's interesting that they've decided to spend some money, which again is, the part and parcel product of, where they want to go with their ballpark situation.
Cole Reagans comes over from Texas in that Aroldis Chapman trade, and he had a very good couple months or so with Kansas City. It'll be interesting to see what he does next season, but I know Pitching Ninja had a really good video comparing his windup to, or his mechanics, I should say, to Cole Hamels. There's a lot of Cole Hamels there.
Let me put it this way, Jack. You have a lot more interest in what Kansas City's going to do than I do.
I live in the Midwest.
That's no excuse.
I'm curious to see what's going to happen here with AL Central. Not a lot of people outside the Midwest care a whole lot.
Right. Well, worry
Okay,
about the
Barry.
White
So
Sox.
yeah, White Sox, and then we got the Cubs also. So both Central divisions, both lame Central divisions that I've been closely following and covering as well. So, all right, Barry, you've been a Hall of Fame voter for over 30 years now. First of all, before Hall of Fame, how many years have you been working in this industry?
This will be my 49th baseball season coming up.
49 years. So my question to you is what keeps you going? What makes you love it so much?
Uh, a part of it is, certainly the camaraderie. It's a social event for me at this point. I get to come see, you guys in the press box, whether it's you guys like you or young guys coming into the business, who are I get to know, and you're invigorating. It's great to see that there are people interested in the game and interested in the business, that want to make a dent in it the same way I did when I was your age. I love seeing what's left of the old scouts who are still around, general managers, managers who I've known for years. The players are getting fewer and far between at this point. But yeah, it is a huge social event for me. And then I still like the process. I like the process of going to the ballpark, getting an idea, going into the clubhouses, talking to the people to write the story that I want to write, then sitting down and writing the story and going through the editing process and then seeing it in print. It never gets old. I guess when that gets old, I'm not going to want to do it anymore. The I tell people this story when people ask me, well, how long do you want to keep doing this? And I just turned 72. And I used to ask that question to my buddy Trevor Hoffman all the time. I go, well, how long do you want to keep pitching? And he said, the hitters will tell me. And they did. In my case, when I look at my computer screen and I can't make heads or tails of it anymore, my computer is going to tell me. And until then, I'm going to keep doing it because it keeps me interested. It keeps my mind sharp. I love the games too. I love watching the games. Even if I'm not writing about a particular game, I'm always gleaning some information that I'm going to be able to use somewhere else down the road. It's a great process. And I'm blessed that, I've had a long career doing it. I mean, really, I've been laid off once, given my unconditional release by MLB in early 2019. But, I went right from there to Forbes and then to Sportico. So I really have never had a day without work in my entire life, either as a freelancer or a staff writer. And I feel that I'm really blessed by it because not a lot of people can say that. So that's what keeps me going.
Yeah, I've only gotten just a little bit of a taste of it, and it's so fun to me. Like, I just can't ever imagine it really getting old. And that's one of the things where I think about, hey, you know what? If I've covered maybe 25 or so MLB events, so maybe 25 to 30, it's like if that's all I ever get, that's 25 or 30 more than the average sports fan ever gets. Like, I'm so blessed and lucky and just incredibly blessed to get to do some of this stuff, to get to go in the clubhouse, to get to talk to players, get to, interview and then talk to people like you, Barry. I mean, it's so fun to me too, and I'm glad to hear that the shine has never worn off for you. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, when you get to the Hall of Fame, think about, there are like 50 or 60, maybe a little more living Hall of Famers, and I see them in Cooperstown every year I go. Uh, the we a lot of us spend time in the bar at the Otasaga Hotel on Friday nights and Saturday nights, talking, and it boggles my mind that every person that I voted for to get into the Hall of Fame since 1992, I either saw pitch as a kid or covered or both. I mean, I just know all these people. They're all people who I know on a first name basis. And that's really something. It's a very small, rarefied, crowd. And I can remember, when I started in this business like you, I was freelancing in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I started my own, wire service and wrote letters to newspapers all over the country saying that I'm available to cover games for you on the West Coast. And through that business, I hooked up with the Philadelphia Bulletin, New York Times, Newsday, Atlanta Constitution, the Montreal Gazette, a lot of San Francisco Examiner, Sacramento Union and B. I mean, a lot of papers that are defunct. I mean, my own paper in San Diego that I went to work for, the San Diego Tribune, is defunct. But the Montreal Gazette contacted me and said they'd like me to cover an Expo road trip in 1976 in San Francisco, Dodger Stadium, and the old Jack Murphy Stadium. And I go, great, this is my first road trip. By the end of that road trip, I had such a good time. It was like, yeah, I could do this. I really do want to do this. And I never looked back.
Yeah, it's like to me it feels like I could get less sleep and yet I still feel like I have more energy doing that cuz I'm doing stuff. I'm getting a social release. I'm seeing people. It energizes me whereas versus just if I'm sitting around here in the Midwest on like a gray day like today where it's, 35 degrees, there's no sunlight, and I could sleep 10 hours and I feel like I have less energy in this situation than I would if I got 5 hours of sleep and I'm just, making the rounds doing all the baseball travel stuff.
Yeah. I wish I could say, though, that I'm not tired all the time, but I am. It doesn't energize me as much as it might you at your age.
So you wrote a very compelling story this past week for Sportico, of course, on your Hall of Fame ballot. You're voting for Billy Wagner. Is this the first time that you're voting for Billy Wagner?
Yes, it was the first time that I voted for Billy Wagner. Yeah, he'd always been on the bubble for me.
So obviously a lot of people are listening to this. They have not read your piece. Can you give a little bit of an explanation as to what sold you on Billy Wagner this time around?
Well, a lot of times, I like to interact with the fans before I do my ballot, and got people have made good arguments, and they've changed my mind. I mean, I'm not a locked in. I am about certain people, like I am about Andrew Jones. I'm not voting for Andrew Jones. I mean, there are reasons. You can tell me all you want to know about his 10 Gold Gloves, but I mean, the guy batted 254, 210 his last four seasons when he ate his way out of the league, and he was arrested for domestic violence. This guy's not getting my vote. Nobody's going to change my mind, and people have tried. But on Wagner, I just said I'm on the fence about Wagner. I've got 3 spots left on my ballot. I'm thinking about Utley and Rollins because of their impact on the 2008, 2009 Phillies, and maybe Wagner, but I'm on the fence about it, convinced me that I'm wrong. And I started getting a lot of feedback. Yeah. And one of the guys who saw that and asked me what I was doing with my ballot was Jesus Ortiz, who used to cover the Astros, for the local paper down there, and knew Billy pretty intimately. And now, I would say, unlike Mariano and Trevor, they had long careers. I spent a lot of time around those people. I had, probably, well beyond a player-writer relationship with Trevor, and Mariano was a great guy to get to know. But Wagner, I never covered his team. He when he played for the Astros, the Mets, the Phillies, the Braves. at the end, I was always around him and I was always in the scrum with him, but I never sat down and really had a good conversation with him. So, Jesus grabbed me at the winter meetings, asked me how I was going to vote, and said, "Well, can I persuade you to vote for Billy Wagner?" And we sat down and talked, and I said, "Yeah, well, I'll do that if I can persuade you to vote for Andy Pettitte." So we had, a long talk about both, and I said to Jesus, "You know what? If you have, if you can give me Billy's telephone number and have him, and I'll call him. I'd like to have a discussion with him before I make this decision." So he did, and he did get in touch with Billy. And when I got back from the winter meetings and that kind of stuff, he, we got in touch with each other and talked for like a half an hour. One of the things that always baffled me with him was that his last season with the Braves, he went into it pretty much saying, "It doesn't matter what I do this season. I'm 37 years old. I'm done, and I'm going home to spend the rest of my life with my kids. I'm not coming back." And Bobby Cox tried to talk him out of it. Players on the team tried to talk about it, but he was pretty steadfast. He could have stayed around, played another year or two, and beefed up his stats. But he thought it was more important to go home and be a father. When I was talking to him on the phone, he explained his whole background as a kid, that his mother and father had divorced when he was 5, that he had bounced from like relative to relative, grandfather and grandmother, and went to 11 schools. And he was still able to overcome all this, pitch in high school and become a very good major leaguer, if not a major leaguer with great Hall of Fame numbers, still enough where, his batting average, against hitters was lower than Trevor. He had more strikeouts per inning than Trevor. There were just areas which said, if you voted for this guy, then why aren't you voting for that guy? And you can't base it all on saves, which he had 424. John Franco had 4. I think he had a couple more. It was, and he's not in the Hall of Fame. So I just felt like once I was done talking with him, and at the end of the conversation, I just said, "I had no idea what kind of adversity you went through as a kid." And he said, "Everything I went through as a kid is the reason why I am where I am right now." And that sold me on voting for him for the Hall of Fame. I'm a big guy. I've been through my own adversity. I got hit in the eye with left eye with a golf club when I was a kid. Lost my sight in left eye. I had 2 bouts with colon cancer at the end of my 50s. Survived that. I know what it's like to go through adversity. It either makes you or breaks you, and it made Wagner, and so that's why I voted for him for the Hall of Fame.
It's a great story. I encourage everyone to check it out if you have not done so yet. It's on Sportico. Quickly, before we get going for today, you used all 10 votes on your ballot. Is that correct?
Correct.
Was there anyone you voted for? Beltre, Todd Helton, Joe Mauer, Andy Pettitte, Manny Ramirez, A-Rod, J. Roll, Gary Sheffield, Chase Utley, and Billy Wagner. Was there anyone that you would have liked to vote if you had an 11th vote?
No. In fact, I had 7 solid votes. Like I told you, usually I look at my ballot. I know what I'm going to vote for. Last year, I thought the ballot was so piss poor that I voted for only 4 people on the ballot. That may be the lowest amount of people that I've ever voted for. I mean, year in and year out, especially when the ballot backlog because of steroids was going on. I had 10 guys every year. And, there was always an 11th or a 12th if I had the room on the ballot. This year, I checked off 7. As I said, I was leaning towards Utley and Rollins, and then Wagner was a big question mark. And I resolved that. I left it sitting on my desk when I went to the winter meetings. I resolved it at the winter meetings and talking to Wagner. As soon as I was done on the phone with Wagner, I colored in the boxes for Rollins, Utley, and Wagner, and put it in the mail, and then wrote the column and posted it. So usually my Hall of Fame column gets more response than almost anything I ever write. People always chime in on it. Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? There's always some guy on the ballot every year that people are, why isn't he on your ballot this year? This year it was Jones. And I explained to people exactly what I just explained to you,
Yeah.
why I'm never voting for Jones. And so, it's an interesting process. But to answer your question, no, there was nobody else on that ballot. If I had 11th spot, I would have voted for, I thought I was pretty giving using all 10.
Can you make the case for Andy Pettitte?
Yeah, I mean, it's really simple. He had 256 wins. He had 19 more in the postseason. Every time the Yankees needed him in a big series, postseason series, he was there. I mean, you could argue that he maybe was never the best pitcher on any of their staffs. They had Clemens, they had Jimmy Key, they had David Wells, but Pettit was always he was a number one, number two. That's what he was. And when Joe Torre needed him those years, he was there. And the guy won 5 World Series, appeared in 6, and won something like 7 or 8 pennants. I mean, he was as money a pitcher as Whitey Ford, and Whitey Ford has better numbers mostly than Whitey Ford. Obviously, Whitey Ford, he had 10 wins and that shutout streak in the World Series. I mean, like Yogi Berra used to laugh with Jared Jeter all the time. It's like when Jeter used to say, well, all you have to do is go to the world, win the pennant and go to the World Series and win. We have 3 rounds of playoffs we have to get through. And then Yogi used to lift his hands and go, I've got 10 of these. You can come over to the house and see him anytime you want. Whitey Ford can say the same thing. But and the fact that, that that Pettit might have used, HGH to recover from an injury or whatever he did is really immaterial to me because I watched this guy pitch his entire career and what kind of impact he made. I mean, if he's not a Hall of Famer, a Hall of Fame pitcher, I don't know who is.
Yeah, and he owned up to it, and at the time, I don't think it was a banned substance.
I think
Or,
HGH was a banned substance. Yeah,
okay, okay. He
I mean
wasn't. There was
he got
something
caught up.
about
He got
yeah,
caught up in the Clemens thing. He, he was named in the Mitchell report. So, and once he was, yeah, he apologized for it. But, look, I don't hold, I have 5 guys on the ballot, I
yeah. You
think, this
got
year that all are under the cloud of steroids, including, A-Rod and Manny, who were suspended. So, guys are what they are. They did what they did. The numbers are the numbers. And, if people don't like it, vote them in and put an asterisk on their ballot or on their plaque or explain something on their plaque that they played during that era or that A-Rod was suspended for a year for doing what he did. And it just goes on the plaque. That's all.
He's
So,
Barry Bloom over at Sportico. Barry, is there anything you'd like to plug or promote, or you want to point people towards your work or your social media, anything like that?
well, I'm at Boomski and at Gramsci on X, the former Twitter, the site formerly known as Twitter. And, you can get me on Facebook. You can get me on LinkedIn. My columns are available. You can go to the Google machine, and put Barry M. Bloom and Sportico, and you get my entire column page of everything I've ever written for Sportico. I'm not sure I don't think the one exists at MLB anymore, but there's plenty of ways of tracking me down.
Good stuff. Well, thank you so much, Barry. I'm sure we'll have you back on sometime, maybe early in the season.
Great, Jack. Thanks for having me, and have a great holiday.
You too. All right, y'all. That concludes our episode today with Barry legend, Barry Bloom. Awesome guy. Met him out at spring training last year. Really good dude. Has taught me a lot about this industry. Just been, like I mentioned, a mentor of mine and a great guy and a great writer too. So it was great having him on here. I'm sure we'll do that again sometime next season. I know he wanted to come on here, so it was great to have Barry here. It was fun talking all things hot stove so far. I'm sure there'll be more moves coming. It might slow down over the next several days now with Christmas. I think it generally, I know Dan O'Dowd was saying this the other day on MLB Network, that generally there isn't a whole lot that happens between Christmas and New Year's. People kind of take a little bit of a vacation and a break with their families. Doesn't mean that things can't happen, but we will be back sometime soon. And I'm sure we'll be bringing you more off-season analysis. And, as we get closer to the college football playoff and the NFL playoffs, perhaps we'll have something football related soon. If you guys want some football content, we can make that happen. And then, of course, we'll have some interviews sometime in the early new year with some athletes, potentially, some reality TV contestants, other amazing, interesting guests. Please subscribe to the Jack Vita Show if you aren't doing so already. We've got at Jack Vita Show on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also, like I said, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit the notifications button. Don't miss out on episodes, and help share the show with a friend if you guys like it. I mean, we're trying to keep growing this thing. I'd love to do a little more monetization on this in 2024, potentially with some advertising. So greatly appreciate the support. I haven't created a Patreon or anything like that. Maybe I'll do that at some point down the road. We'll see. I'm not ruling it out, but I'd rather have money coming in from advertisers than from the listeners themselves. So anyway, if you want to help out, post this on social media, share it with a friend, subscribe, and tune in to our next episode. Until then, I'm Jack Vita, bringing the dance and lobsters.